Good morning, scholars. What do we have happening here? We have our castle, our guardhouse, our peasant, our knight is leaving the castle, but then on the side we have another wagon I can see coming into the picture. Looks like a prisoner wagon. Who is in the wagon? Oh, I do not know. But they're going to take him around. Go around back. Okay. So they take him around to the back of the castle to place the prisoner in the dungeon. We will have to wait another day to see who that might have been, because today we are going to talk about a great king called Charles the Hammer. We're going to find out why he was known as Charles the Hammer. You ready to hear his story? Let's begin. Well, here's the story of Charles the Hammer Martel, the great kings of France. Well, after the Islamic army invaded Spain, they didn't want to stop. The fighters planned to charge right up into France and conquer the kingdoms of the Franks as well. "We are like a mighty wind," they boasted. "No one can stop the wind when it blows, and no one can stop the armies of Allah." But then the wind met the hammer. The hammer was Charles Martel, the new king of Franks. Charles had a hard time becoming king. Not everyone wanted him to inherit the throne. He was even thrown in jail to keep him from claiming the crown. But Charles escaped from jail, gathered together a huge army, and led his men into battles against his enemies. He fought so hard and he was so persistent in hammering his enemies that he gained the nickname Martel, which in his language of the Franks meant the hammer. He won the throne of the Franks through sheer determination, and he didn't intend to give it up to the Islamic Empire. When he heard that the Islamic armies had blown through Spain and were approaching his borders, he gathered his men together and went to meet them. In the year 732, the Franks and the Muslims met at the city of Tours, which you can see right here, in a great battle. Here is one medieval telling from an Arab chronicler describing the battle. And you can see down here, this is where the Rock of Gibraltar is in Spain. Down at the bottom, you see at the tip of Spain that is where they would have come into Spain across from Africa, right down here. And that's where Tariq told them they were going to burn their ships and they were either going to conquer or perish. Well, once they were in Spain, it was not a big deal to come up into the rest of Europe, which is what their plan was, to cross the Pyrenees Mountains, and take over the kingdom of the Franks, and from there on into the Saxons, and continue their conquering and plundering of different towns and cities. Up here is where the Vikings were. This is Scandinavia. Here's the British Isles. Down here is Italy with Rome and the Roman Empire, and this is the head of the duck or the Mediterranean Sea. So here's the story of Charles the Hammer in the year 732. When the Muslims came into the land of the Franks, they passed through like a desolating storm. They laid waste over the countryside and took captives without numbers. So there were so many people they held captive they couldn't even number them all. All the Franks trembled at the thought of the terrible army. They ran to their king, Charles, and told him that the Muslims were making havoc in their land. "Be of good cheer," the king told them, and he got on his horse and led a numberless host of soldiers toward the city of Tours. So he had an army so great they couldn't be numbered. Now the troops of the Muslims were camped outside the walls of the city of Tours. They had gathered so much wealth and food and clothing and horses and gold that they were weighed down with their spoils. They had so many possessions now, it was hard for them to move about. It was a weight upon them. Their general looked over the camp. My men are not ready to fight, he thought. They are more worried about their plunder than about the coming battle. I should order them to abandon everything, except for the scimitars and their horses. And the scimitars are the curved swords that they fought with. And of course, the mighty war horse, very important in a battle. Abandon everything except for those two necessary items. But he was afraid that the soldiers would revolt against him if he ordered them to give up their booty or their treasure. So he decided to let them keep it. And when they insisted they were ready to attack the city of Tours and to steal from it all the wonderful riches inside, he agreed, even though he knew that Charles, the king of the Franks, was approaching with an army to defend it. So the army of the Muslims prepared to attack the city walls, but as they were besieging it, Charles himself came into sight with his army behind him. The horsemen of the Islam charged out to meet him, and the two armies fought all day until night came and they could no longer see each other. As soon as the gray light of dawn came, they began to fight again. But when the Muslims saw that Charles was coming closer and closer to their tents, they began to think of all the wealth inside. The Franks will plunder our camp, they cried. We will lose our wealth. So instead of fighting, they rode back to protect their tents. Their general tried to rally them back to the front lines, cheering them on, but he was surrounded by the Franks and killed. And when he fell, the whole host fled before their foes. So the Islamic army turned and ran with as many of their wealth and riches as they could. They fled. The Franks had won the day, and Charles Martel had hammered his enemy once again. And that is why Charles Martel got his nickname, the Hammer.